So I'm going to compare. I'm going to count. I'm making sure I'm painting the fourth one. Remember, that's the key to painting repetitive multiple items, is count them. Make sure you're always looking at the same one that you should be looking at, and be consistent. So I think we're good there. Another thing you want to be careful of when you're doing this is make sure your line, whatever you're using to measure your angle, is like parallel to the surface. You don't want this or this, because that's going to kind of skew the perspective that you're looking at with paintbrush in this case, and it's going to affect the angle, and it may look right, but it's not actually right because it's not parallel. So because this is such an important point, and it's kind of like in the middle of nothing, I'm making sure that that is absolutely correct, because when there's not a lot around it to compare it to other things, it's very easy to get it wrong. One other thing I want to compare it to, now that I'm looking at it, is this edge on the wooden leg of the chair. I want to compare it to that. In theory, it should be something like that. And it is dead on. So we have the top angle of this button here. Now I'm just going to drop another angle this way to see where the bottom of it is. And this one's angled pretty heavily to the right. So I'm just going to double check that. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to compare it to this corner here. So this is slightly lower than the edge. So it's somewhere like that. So again, working with angles, need to make sure we check it a billion times. Now, because this one is so far off, I'm doing this way more and it's going slower than it normally would, but I do want to make sure that I am dead on. I'm going to do the same thing, compare it to this edge here. It could be something like that. Actually, I think this is a little further down, somewhere like that. So now I'm going to just look at it and say, does that make sense? This does look like it's slightly high in this bottom space where these rivets are. Does seem it's placed relatively high. In the picture or source material, it's not really that high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both of these down a little bit. Just a tiny little bit will change where that's laying in that space. So we're just going to draw this in. Now compared to this one, it's about the same width. So we're going to make sure that we keep the width consistent. Comes off this kind of angle at first. This side is more horizontal. It's pretty angled on the left side. And then it's a pretty crisp angle coming down. This is relatively straight up. And it's straight up basically until it connects with that edge there. So something that I'm noticing is that that's kind of tall. And if we compare it to this one, it's actually taller. And I know that that's not how perspective works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them down a little bit so that it's not as tall. And this is going to hopefully work out once I've worked my way over to that spot. So I'm going to measure the height one more time. And that looks a little better. So this one, I'm going to paint in the shadows. Does this weird like swirly thing here. Or paint on my brush. So here's this swirly thing, right? And then there's a shadow on the top edge. And that's it. So then I'm gonna tap it, lighten that line a little bit. Now we know that there's 4 rivets on this side of it and 3 on that side. And visually that makes sense. There's a little more space on this side than that side. So we're good to go. So now from here, I could work the next one over, or I could work this way to the left. I'm gonna work from this way to the left. And I'm gonna keep that pattern that we've done all the way through here. So we're gonna compare edges, fill it in, do the pattern around it, and we're gonna go from there. So I am dying still. So I'm just gonna get to it. I'm gonna work on this one here. I wanna make sure that it interacts with what we have in the design. So top edge to top edge. This is a relatively steep line. Don't know if that is quite what I wanted. I think it's a little higher. Something like that. Just a little like that. There we go. Bottom edge. It's right like that. So, oops, I think I may have messed up this line here. Okay, it's fixed. So this one, visually, I know is kind of in the middle, just like this one. It's not higher or lower than this one. So you just want to kind of step back and make sure that that makes sense. Now to find out where it is on those lines, I'm going to actually use this as my reference here. So it's actually like straight down. Nope, I'm looking at the wrong one. It comes off slightly like that. So looks like it's somewhere right there, which visually doesn't look too accurate. So I'm gonna actually compare it to my grid. And I do think it's over a little more. Something like that. What else? I can compare it to, I don't know if you can see that, but this is where my organizational lines intersect. So I'm going to compare it to this corner here. Should be something like that. And that matches pretty good. So we're going to trust that line. It's getting kind of tight in there, but I'll worry about that in a second. And then the bottom edge is slightly to the right of that. So this is actually right on the right edge of our line that we made. So my microphone is battery powered, and so if all of a sudden I'm like crackly or you can't hear anything, let me know in chat and I'll get that sorted out. I just need to swap some like AAA batteries or something. So we have the corners. The width on this one is about the same as this, so we'll keep that in mind as we're drawing it. The angle comes off the top like that. Again, this one is another one that's kind of horizontal all the way down. So it's like this on the left edge, and then kind of 45-degree angle there. It does have kind of a flat bottom for a second, and then angles up like this, and then it's kind of just an even curve back up to the top. So Looks like that's pretty even. And if you notice, this, and this are pretty even. They almost look like they're, super precisely placed, equidistant from each other. And that's exactly what I'm seeing in my source material. So that's another visual check that we can do to make sure that that is accurate. And this one, again, is mostly shadow. It has a little swirly again, but it has a strange highlight on the right side that we want to make sure we capture. So it's kind of like that. And then, like all the others, there's a shadow here on top from the fabric that it's surrounded by. I'm going to bring it back a little bit. I'm going to compare this part of the design to where it meets the edge, and it looks pretty good. So I think we ended this last button in the design pretty precisely. So now we can just work around this one. This one has kind of a shape that comes off the top like this, almost like a horn. And something like that. And there's kind of just a mess underneath. So when there's something that's just a mess and it's detailed, but maybe your source material doesn't have the resolution to do it, to see it properly, or even it has the resolution and it's just so small and delicate that you can't really tell. What I recommend to do is start with some key lines, some key gestures in it, and then kind of fill in detail after the fact. So here, there's a lot going on in here. And to be honest, there's not a whole lot of structure to it. So we're going to actually pull off a lot more of that paint than we normally would. And so it stays kind of, ambiguous. There's nothing super defining to it, because there's nothing super defining to it in our source material. So that's really all there is to this. There is one line coming off of this part of the design that I missed. Everything else interacts with the next button. So the next button I know is basically right underneath this one. So we've done one, our second one is here. We have 3 and 4. It's looking pretty good. It's looking like we did a good job measuring that one, and that our rivets are going to make sense. Now at this point, I've painted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't remember if I painted that one. No, I didn't. So I painted 6. At this point, I want to step back and I want to look at them and make sure that if I was looking at that, that looks like that could be the rivets on a chair, because it's easy to get carried away with angles. Maybe they're too steep or something, and it looks like it just doesn't make sense with perspective on this top and bottom line of this section. So you want to always step back and look. Doing it once every rivet is too much, I think. You're not going to get as good of a picture. I mean, it'll still make sense. You'll still want to check it, but if you do it every 4 or 5 or so, at least in this situation, if you're doing something more precise with a lot more, maybe you want to do it every 3, 2, whatever. But that's a key part of this, is step back, look at it, make sure it makes sense. And to be honest, I'm extremely pleased with it. I do think that what I was afraid of or concerned of about this having a lot of visual weight, I think that is a serious concern right now. So I am going to kind of lift up some of those lines. I want to make sure that I keep my edges to my buttons, but everything else is kind of light. and not too dense and eye catching. So we'll move on to the next rivet here. Will my music stop again? I literally have like dozens of songs here, and I feel like only a few of them are playing. So I'm getting going again. All right, so moving on. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you like this, if you're on Twitch, follow and get your name on the wall. They're all very much appreciated, and thank you in advance. Moving on, we have 2 or 3 buttons, sorry, in between the ones we have here. So our next one is kind of short and fat, and it is directly below this here. Now, the only reason that I can use these as a reference is because I measured those to be very precise. If I didn't, I would not be comfortable using those to plot these rivets. So be extra careful. If you kind of rushed this and it's not super precise, maybe you said, oh, it's okay. It's not super important. There's so much around it. It's so busy. It's okay. You can do that. Just remember that you don't want to use it to plot any other points or elements to your painting. So this one, again, the bottom goes slightly to the right. I'm not going to worry about the bottom yet. I'm going to just get the angle off of this one here. And it is slightly lower than the one next to it. The point where I think it should be even lower than that. Is this top one? This one is like right there. So our bottom edge is basically in line. So it's somewhere like there. Like I said, this one is kind of fat. So it comes off at a pretty horizontal angle there. It interacts with the fabric, so it's not actually a rounded edge on that side. And then this side kind of just rolls up. Kind of like that. Gotta clean up that edge there, and I kind of took this off. Gotta make sure I keep that. So there's our button. Slightly wider than these, slightly down compared to the one on the right. The bottom edge is right in line with the one on the right. So looks like we're pretty good. This is another one that has a weird highlight like in the middle of the rivet. Everything below that is shadow. So we're going to fill that in, and then this is pretty much correct already. So there we have our next rivet. Looks pretty good. So now we're going to move on to the design around it. So off of the right edge, it's like a weird leaf thing. It goes all the way to the top of this section. This kind of follows parallel to it. And on the bottom edge, we have another kind of ambiguous area, similar to the one next to it. And this shape is actually going to continue over quite a few rivets. So I'm not actually going to do that one yet, but there is something here in between. It's kind of a little branch or the end of a leaf or something that interacts with that side and interacts with the left side of the rivet. So this is pretty dark here. I want to dial that back a little bit. These should be lighter. Also, make sure when you're using your finger to lift areas, make sure you kind of rub it off in between. Otherwise, you're going to be putting that paint back on in places you don't want it to be. And that's just going to make things look dirty and clumsy. Not super important when you're working on like a drawing layer, but you may want to do that later on when you're on some of your upper layers, and that's when you want to be super careful. That's when you may want to use the back of your brush to kind of move things around a little bit. But we'll talk about that when we get to that point. We're still quite a ways away from that. Once this is painted, we're going to have to let this cure because we're going to be painting over top of it. So that'll be about a week before we come back to just direct painting on this chair. What I'm thinking, after this, we might go into the mask. I kind of want to separate the mask from the hand because right now it looks a little awkward because in between here, this is actually masked, but it kind of just looks like she's got a fat finger. So I kind of want to do this first. It's going to be direct painting. We don't need any sort of drawing underneath it. It's almost going to be a flat shape. Not a whole lot to it. I don't want a lot of attention going to it, so it's not going to have a lot of detail. If I did want this to be a focal point, if it was super important, that's when I would get super critical about, seams, sewing, any structure to it. It will have structure. It's not going to just be a flat shape, but it's going to be very simplistic. Then after that, I think I'm going to move on to some of the jewelry. I'm going to do that indirect, like the face, all the other flesh, because from my experience, gold looks better painted indirect than direct. When it's painted direct, it kind of just looks yellow. It doesn't have the depth that gold has. So that'll be indirect. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about indirect painting there. I also want to kind of block in this cloak here. That's going to be relatively flat as well. This figure in general is going to be relatively dark, flat compared to this one. Much less detail. One thing I do want to keep is I do want to keep this hand pretty detailed. I think you can probably see that already, that it is more detailed than this flat shape here. This hand really only has like a few shadows in it, and that's really holding the entire shape. And to be honest, it's not going to change a whole lot. I'm going to glaze some color over top of it, but it's going to be relatively flat, and that's going to pull that weight, that visual weight, away from it to other parts of the painting. And even though it's right on the edge, it's not going to pull your eye off of it. So that's one thing you always want to avoid, is if your eye, you have this path of where your eye goes, right? You never want it to go off so abruptly that it's no longer on the painting anymore. You want it to be self-contained, and that's what's going to keep interest. The interest is going to come in how you arrange things. That's why some people can look at abstract paintings for half an hour at a time. I've done it myself. Even though there's really nothing tangible to look at, just finding new things, your eye moving around. It's self-contained. There's never a point where I go like that and my focus goes somewhere else. Something you really want to be careful of when you're in the early stages, when you're putting together your composition. So I think I've ranted enough. I'm going to move on, do some more buttons. Looks like it's 8:40 here in Pennsylvania. Probably go for another 20 minutes or so. Might be enough to do 2 buttons. Not really sure. Actually, if we have 2 more buttons, it might actually be too much space. This one might be too close, but we'll worry about that when we get there. I'm just going to move on to this next button, and we're going to see how far we can get in the next 20 minutes. Okay. Here, I want my paint to be the consistency of milk. You want it to still be opaque, but you want it to be fluid. And when I talk more about how to set up your palette, or maybe a section on like mixing colors, I'll have my detail camera on my palette. For now, there's not a whole lot to look at. So for now, it's just one color, my burnt umber, and I'm thinning it down with my medium, not my paint thinner. And we're going to move on to the next button. Now these here actually do seem like they are spaced apart more. These ones here are very cluttered. And these ones in here, like the next 2, this one, and maybe the next one after that, are spaced further apart, and then they get cluttered at the end again. So this one is going to be kind of in line with this pattern here. So that comes down. This actually isn't painted fully, so I'm going to add that there as a guide. And our top edge is going to basically be straight down from that. Now that does seem a little far, and I know it's a little further than the other one, but I might exaggerate that a little bit and really move it over, just to be sure. So then I'm going to compare the top edge via an angle. Remember, humans suck at measuring angles, so you want to triple check. Also, remember to count your rivets. Make sure you're painting the correct one. Just during this session, I've accidentally painted the pattern around the wrong rivet. It's super easy to get lost and to mix them up. Remember to count them. So we have our top edge there. I'm going to actually compare it to this one here as well. And we're good there. I'm going to compare the bottom edge. Like that there. Now, again, I did this earlier, but if you're having a tough time measuring and then keeping that spot with your eyes, you can use something else to measure and then just paint along. The ability to like see it and like see it in your mind's eye will come with practice. If you can't do it already, just naturally. So this one, the bottom edge is slightly to the right again. So we're talking right there. We're going to clean this up, making sure you can still see that in the detail, which you can. And then we're going to paint the outer edges. Now this one is thinner than the previous one, more narrow, so it has steeper angles coming off of it. Something like that. and then the fabric interacts with the right edge here, so it's not actually round. So it's something like that. And I do know that this one is spaced a little bit further than this one from this one. So it looks like our spacing is good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the value on this. This is similar to the others. Shadow on the bottom. And shadow on top that kind of came naturally while we were plotting it out. And we have our next rivet. Now we're going to have one more in there, and it looks like the spacing is pretty good. I'm going to do some of the design around it. I'm going to take a step back. I know I said don't do this every one, but in some cases, why not? So this looks pretty good. I'm definitely happy with that. So onto the design. This one has a bit more going on around it than the others. It has a pretty busy shape here. Remember to draw shapes, not the outer like edges of what you're painting. Just always remember that a line does not exist in nature. No such thing as a line. Now you could paint a line and then there's a line, but even then, it's not going to be a uniform line. It's going to be affected by perspective. It's going to be lighter in some areas depending on the lighting. You want to always paint shapes. That's what's going to elevate your painting into something painterly instead of something that looks like line drawing or something like that. And especially when you're working with oil paints, you want to focus on being painterly. Even in this stage where we're technically drawing lines, we're drawing shapes. So our lines are never uniform. They're thicker in some areas, they're thinner in others, they're lighter in some areas and darker than others. And that's going to communicate to your future self a little bit more information when you're actually doing painting on top of this. If you have that nuance in the drawing underlayer of your painting, that nuance is going to be exaggerated when you put your paint on top of it, and it's going to really make it rich and engaging and really interesting to look at. So I'm going to move on with this here. This is a strange thing here. There's a shadow coming off of this side. I just want to capture real quick, loosely, not actually anything definite. We have another one coming off the bottom here. So I'm going to actually lift that off more than what I would normally do. And there is a line. There's a line in the design here that I'm going to specifically ignore for now until I have this button here, because it comes off of that one and loops down here. So that's really all we're going to do for this part of the design. Actually, this does interact with that right there. All right, so double check my time. So we got 10 more minutes. I think that's just enough to finish this button in between here and maybe do the design around it. And then gonna have to call it a night. Let's do it. Okay, so one thing I've noticed is that I've kind of lost my corners, which are important, I think, at this stage. Corners of my rivets. So I'm going to just darken them a little bit and then move on. So this one is slightly lower on both the top and the bottom than this one or this one. So it's going to be not as steep. So it's going to be somewhere there. And then bottom. It's going to be like there. Let me triple check. Oh, wait. Wait a minute. I'm painting the wrong one. So that's twice in one session where I was not counting properly. I was painting the wrong one. And actually this one is the one that's lower than the others. And the one that we could be working on is actually higher than the others. So we were very wrong there. And it's a good thing I was counting. So let me double check. We're pretty good there. And bottom edge. Something like that. Now, in terms of where it is, it's somewhere right here. It's what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. And rather than compare this to anything, I'm going to compare the negative space between this button and the button I'm painting and this button and the button I'm painting to kind of space it out. And it looks like it's not perfectly centered. It is slightly to the left. So here would be perfectly centered. So slightly to the left is probably right there. And this button does angle like that. So slightly to the right. And so there we have our button placement there. You'll see this one is higher than all the others. And that is exactly what I'm seeing here. One thing I might do is I might bring this down a little bit. And this one is very pointy on the top and bottom. It's not super rounded. So we want to make sure we capture that. You want to make sure each one has its own personality. And that's what's going to make these not look like they're just, you know, ovals, repetitive ovals. So this one angles down kind of sharp there. It's very pointy. It's almost vertical here. And it's kind of flat on top, and then this comes down like this. Okay. So this one looks like all the other ones we've done lately, where the shadow on the bottom kind of rounds around like that, and then there's a shadow on top. Going to cut this off on the bottom a little bit, bring that out. Now we can draw this line we've been skipping, which goes from the right of the tip and comes in to the shadow that we made here. It loops in again like this. Goes down like this. And connects to our design here. Because it's on the edge, I'm going to lift a little bit more than usual because you don't want things right in line with the edge. You want to be careful of that. Now we do have some shadows here that I want to make sure get captured. There's one here. Really, I'm just kind of like scumbling or scribbling to get these shadows where I want them, but not definite. So we're going to lift that line there. Now the top of this is very petal shaped. So we have something like this and this. Almost looks like a cartoon dog or something. This interacts with this shape here that we drew. And I'm going to lift that up. And now there's a shape that curves down to the right of this one. And I'm going to paint that, and we're going to call it a night. So thank you for watching. I'm going to finish this up and call it there. If you enjoyed this, please follow if you haven't already. We're going to pick up where we left off. Next stream, we're going to finish this up. We're going to move on to something else, and we'll talk about something different instead of repetitive things and counting them and triple checking your angles. So, thank you, and have a good day.